지난달 하버드 동아시아학과에서 우리의 국악을 선보이는 행사가 있었습니다. 발표를 맡은 힐러리 핀첨송은 25년째 한국과 국악을 연구해왔는데요. 인디애나에서 인류음악학 박사학위를 받고 버클리, 샌프란시스코에서 연구를 하다가 한국 민속학을 연구한 교수의 권위로 처음 국악을 접했고 서울대 교수가 되어 연구를 이어오고 있다고 합니다. 서울대 인터뷰에서 새 아이의 어머니인 그녀는 한국어도 모른 채 넘어와 고생했었지만 지금은 영어를 더 못한다고 밝히기도 했는데요. 올해 연구년을 가지며 집필활동에 집중하고 있는 그녀는 교육, 작곡, 그리고 국악의 최근 트렌드에 세 분야로 나누어 지난 20년 동안 국악은 어떻게 변화하였고 21세기에는 어떠한 방향으로 가고 있는가를 연구하던 중 하버드의 초청을 받고 이석주 명인과 함께 미국에 나타났습니다.
Sangyeonsan is a piece from the Sunbi or literati tradition. And one of the things that I alluded to just a moment ago is that the Chosun dynasty, which was again 1392 to 1910, was really marked heavily by a Neo-Confucian aesthetic and ideology. So prior to the 14th century, Buddhism was very dominant in Korea. And so one of the things that you do when this was the Goryeo era, or Goryeo dynasty, and when you have a change of power, one of the things that you tend to do or that you want to do is discredit the former powers that be. And so one of the issues with Goryeo, especially towards the end, was that the Buddhist monasteries had amassed a great amount of wealth and they had a great amount of dominance in sway in Korean society. So at the dawn of the Yi dynasty then, or Chosun dynasty in 1392, people were very interested in kind of cutting off a connection with that history and building a new history. And this history was very much influenced again by Confucian ideology. So this piece is actually a classic example of syncretism because the aesthetics musically can said to be really connected to Neo-Confucianism. And one of the things that's very strong in Confucianism, especially a very strict form of it, is you know your place in society. You know where you stand compared to somebody else. You know how to use a particular type of language when communicating with another person, depending on their social status and your social status. So the idea is that you know where you stand, and the idea of being very expressive or expressing sadness or anger or a grievance very emotionally or outwardly is not something that is necessarily desired or considered to be very good for you, either as an individual in society. So music as a whole was said to be, the music that was condoned by the government at that time was supposed to be an example for the rest of society. And there was ritual music at court called aak. And so the ritual music was very slow, very stately, very impressive, very majestic. And so it kind of set the mood for court ritual and state functions. Another type of music that wasn't necessarily ritualistic, but was very much tied to Confucian ideals was called pungyu. Now this is where I get to syncretism, because pungyu didn't start in the Chosun era, 14th century to 20th century. It actually started way before that particular time. Way before the Goryeo dynasty, there was a period of time called the Three Kingdoms period, and there were three kingdoms. In Shilla, like there were aristocrats everywhere else. And in Shilla, there were a group of young men who were sons of aristocrats, and they were referred to as the Hwarang. So the Hwarang were flower boys, and they were given this name because they wore these flowers in their hair. But they were also pretty boys of the time. They were the metrosexuals, of early Korean history. They were the predecessors of the K-pop Gominam that you have in Korea today. So this is the Hwarang, and so the Hwarang practiced a way of life known as pungyu, and pungyu means wind and stream, and it really draws heavily on this idea that we must use our bodies, our minds, our spirits to connect to nature. So the Hwarang engaged in a variety of activities, from sports, horseback riding, archery, to poetry, calligraphy, and music making, and this was a part of life. This was a way of life known as pungyu, and music was just a part of this. And so there's an aesthetic that emerged at that time, and that aesthetic was naki pulyu e pulbi, this idea. It's not Confucian, it's not Buddhist necessarily, it's really Taoist in nature. But this Taoist idea was very appealing. So the Hwarang existed and they flourished during the Shilla, and then time went on, and some people believe the Hwarang kind of died out in popularity. And then you had the opening of the Chosun dynasty in 1392. And there were still the landed aristocrats at that time, and they were very interested in following the Confucian example. But they found Pungnu very appealing, because the Pungnu ideals also espoused things like respecting the king, even ideas about revenge. There was a whole Hwarang aesthetic and moral code and commandments that this group of young men went by. And these ideals were very appealing to the literati, the Sonbi, who were, pretty much in control of society. These were the people that were born into a status. They were the landed aristocrats, and they were the ones who were able to take the civil service exam so that they could then hold state positions or government positions. But in their spare time, they engaged in music making and poetry writing and calligraphy, and they practiced a lifestyle that they were calling Pungnu. So this Pungnu aesthetic thrived and developed very strongly still during the Chosun era. And so music was a very strong part of this. And so this is where we have this genre of music that I'm about to introduce, which is known as Pungnu. Sangyongsan is the very, very first piece of Yongsan Huisang, and the title actually comes, Yongsan Huisang, the title comes from a lecture that Buddha was supposedly gave on a holy mountain. And the lyrics originally, there used to be a song that went with this, and the lyrics originally were Sangyongsan Bulbo Sai, And so we don't really know how the lyrics were sung or presented. We just know that there were lyrics. It's very slow. It has a 20-beat rhythmic pattern, and it's really just about breath. It's about roundness, and it's about connecting to an inner spirit. This music is the ultimate meditation music. And so this is a great example. This is a piri. Piri is a double reed instrument. It's a tiny instrument with a lot of punch. It has a very, very strong sonority, and so you might be surprised when he comes out and he plays. But this particular solo was developed specifically for the piri to bring out the mellow characteristics of the instrument and to also really highlight the aesthetics of this particular style of music. So our first performer today is a wonderful piri performer. 상영상 먼저 하는 거죠? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. We had a little bit of change in order, and I got my wires crossed. So our first performer is Seokju Lee. He is a wonderful performer. He is from a large family of musicians. He's been playing music since before he can remember. He's a specialist in Korean folk music, but also a gifted performer in all the genres that the piri can play in, which is pretty much all the genres of Korean. Let's welcome Seokju Lee to the performance space.